Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Schell and I'm a specialist in the Germanic languages. I have a bachelor's degree in German, a master's degree in linguistics, and a PhD in Germanic linguistics. Now, in today's video, what I wanted to do was give you part one of a deeper discussion and analysis of the Horn of Gallehus, or really I should say the Horns of Gallehus. There's actually a ton to talk about regarding these two horns. If you actually look in your typical academic chronology book, you'll see that most authors maybe dedicate about a paragraph or so to the horn in question that actually bears the runic inscription. I actually gave a complete full analysis of these two horns, which I look at as basically an inseparable object, if you will. And I dedicated about 10 pages or so to the analysis of these horns in my dissertation. So that's essentially what I'm going to be talking about here. In this first part, though, what I wanted to do was talk about the inscription itself, in which case I'm going to go ahead and offer you somewhat of a newer interpretation. And for part two, I will actually go ahead and talk about the icons and then the function of the horn as well. Overall, I actually do believe that the Horn of Gallehus, which bears the runic inscription, is a magical object. That's actually kind of controversial. Most academics do not believe that at all. And in fact, the sort of default inscription that academics go to when they say, see, runes are not always used in a magical context, is actually this particular inscription. But if you look at the inscription and the horns overall, it does seem like it's actually a sort of runic object that's really more of a magical object. So again, you can't really come to that conclusion until you've seen this this part of the video, part one regarding the inscription itself, and then of course part two regarding the iconography and the functions of the horns as well. So this horn with the inscription is typically cataloged as DR12. This is how many academic chronologists like to just categorize things. Like we have DR12, which is the Horn of Gallehus. We have DR360, for example, and then we have DR196. And these are just catalog numbers. It just makes it easier for us to refer to particular inscriptions throughout a body of work, for example. But what I do in this video, and actually like I said in my dissertation, is I actually refer to these two horns as DR12A and DR12B, and it is DR12B which bears the runic inscription, but DR12A which bears basically it's just the horn without the inscription. So this particular inscription is actually dated to about 400 CE, and it is Northwest Germanic. So it's not Scandinavian, but it's also not West Germanic. If anything, it's kind of like, it's before then. It's Northwest Germanic because linguistically it doesn't share features specifically Scandinavian, but it doesn't share features specifically West Germanic either. So, if anybody calls this a Scandinavian inscription or writes that Z as a capital R, or says it's some form of Proto-Norse or some stuff like that, that's just really more of it's rooted in all the decades of research where politics got in the way. So if you haven't seen my video on politics regarding Germanic versus Scandinavian part 1, I highly recommend that you check that video out as well, so you can see where I'm coming from regarding this inscription actually being Northwest Germanic. So as far as these horns are concerned, they were actually, the original ones were actually unfortunately melted down. They were stolen and melted down in 1802. And so, what I'm going to be working with here primarily in these videos are the drawings of Ola Worm, which were actually recorded in 1641. So if you go to the Museum of Copenhagen, for example, you'll see these two horns on display there. But they are reproductions. So, unfortunately, we don't actually have the original objects here. So as far as the basic overview of this object or the objects in question, the first horn, which did not bear the runic inscription, was actually found by a woman named Kirsten Svensdotter, and that was actually in 1639 in Gallehus. It was like this little village of Gallehus. In April of 1734, there was someone named Jerk Lassen, in which case he discovered the second horn. So the second horn, which bears the runic inscription, like I said, I will refer to as DR12B, and the other horn, which was discovered by Kirsten, will be referred to as DR12A. Really, DR12B just means that here's the runic inscription, and then DR12A is the one that has just the iconography on it. So that's the manner in which I will go ahead and talk about these two horns. And the inscription itself is that famous, Ek Tlewagastes Holtias Horna Tawido. Ek. Well, this is the very first word that we see on the horn. I really have no new argument really to add to this pronoun. It's pretty self-explanatory, but this is a very old pronoun. We do not see that it is actually raised, where that E is raised to I, as in like ik, in the West Germanic languages. So it still remains an E, in which case that informs us basically that it is a very old form and it is a direct reflex of Proto-Germanic, ek. So this next word, Tlewagastes, is typically translated as fame guest or protected guest. Based on the research I did, I found that fame guest seems to make the most sense. It's also not a generic maker's mark. You're going to run into that a lot too in with these academic runology books. They say it's nothing but just a generic maker's mark, like Bob. It's not. It's actually part of a poetic formula, right? Tlewagastes Holtias Horna Tawido. So it was a carefully composed piece of poetry, in which case I don't believe that fame guest here was actually like a personal name, but it was rather more of like an epithet. So it's strange then to really sort of have this name be interpreted as just a prosaic marker's inscription. So ultimately I argue that Tlewa and Gastes, so in other words fame and guest, it consists of a nexus linking fame, lofty, and guest. It is a contract between the host and the guest, and in our case it's the runemaster. So I argue that Tlewagastes is more of an epithet, in other words someone who has received haughty hospitality rather than some sort of banal name. If anyone wants to see an in-depth argument of that, I'll go ahead and post it in the comments below. Just if you're interested, I'll go ahead and reply to you. But basically what's going on here is that this person who is referred to as the fame guest is the one who was really honored, right? So it's this person who was honored, and what's happening here with these two horns is that he's acknowledging that he was being honored, and for him being honored with whatever form of hospitality it was, in return he's going to go ahead and give these two horns as a gift. The next word is Holtias. Now this sometimes you'll see like son of Holt for this word, so you'll see like fame guest son of Holt. That is if that Holtias is actually if it can actually reach back into Indo-European times with that IO meaning some sort of patronymic. I don't adhere to that idea of it being a patronymic just because I don't see any other evidence for it anywhere else regarding Germanic. If anyone has seen that, let me know, but I still have not run across it. However, if you do look at that as actually an ablative form, it can actually mean, ablative just means like from a place. So Holtias can actually be understood as like from Holt, if you will. And to corroborate this idea, you actually see the word Sikias, meaning from the psyche in runic inscription as well. So a similar form, Sikias, meaning from the psyche, and then you have Holtias, meaning from Holt. Then it makes more sense to say, now we have fame guest, from the Holt. So the next lexeme is horna. 99% across the board, you will see that scholars interpret this as horn, the singular accusative neuter horn. This makes a lot of sense if you're just looking at the inscription. But we're not looking at just the inscription, right? We want to understand the runic object as a whole. So the inscription plus the images plus the use of the particular object or objects, that's what's going to help us understand the object in question. So But if you do look at the inscription by itself, it could make sense to where it says, I made the horn. Now, that is, of course, upheld by Antonsen, Duvel, Krause, Siemek, all kinds of other runic scholars. And if it's singular, it would have been written as horna. If the intent was actually plural, it would actually be hornu. So it seems very clear that it would have been singular horn, like I made the one horn. But again, we're dealing with two horns, so what do we do here? So if anyone's interested, there is a scholar named Theo Vennemann who argues that horna is actually an archaic use of the dual accusative form. And he makes a really good argument for that. So basically he says that what this means essentially is that we have essentially it says that I gifted or I made the two horns rather than just singular horn or plural horns. We actually have this archaic use of two horns with this horna. Talbido. This verb is typically translated as made or prepared or wrought or something like that. But I believe that it could actually mean something a little bit deeper than that, especially concerning that the epithet used for this horn is actually the fame guest, right, or the one who has received this great amount of hospitality. So I don't really think that prepared quite captures what's going on here, since we're probably dealing with this deep-rooted Indo-European idea of gift giving. So Talbido, the reason why Talbido is also sort of understood that way, as far as prepared or made, is because for example, Old English Talion means to prepare, and you have Old English and Old Saxon, which also can mean to prepare, or even Middle Low German, which means tauen, in which case means to prepare or to make. However, if we look at the Scandinavian cognates, it can actually mean to give, grant, bestow, assist, or help. And so the original offer could have meant something like reward or offer. So it's, in this case, the reason I'm jumping into or pulling from Scandinavian sources is because, remember what I said before, this is not purely a Scandinavian horn, but it's also or an inscription, but it's also not purely a West Germanic inscription either. So it's right before really you have that split linguistically, because it's not really purely Scandinavian linguistically speaking, and it's not purely West Germanic linguistically speaking as well. So another example is in Gothic, where you have talion being used instead of workjan, in which case we have this notion of armion talion in Gothic, which means literally to give alms. There is no armion workjan, like to work alms. So in this case, it actually means to do, or to grant, to bestow, or something like that. So ultimately, what's going on here with this entire inscription, with me being focused on the words, is that we're actually dealing with an entire situation of gift giving, in which case I will go ahead, like I said in the next video, part 2, I will go ahead and talk about the different icons, and actually which is really focused on ritual, especially hunting rituals. And it's this idea of somebody receiving a great amount of hospitality, and in return this inscription says that I, the one who has received great hospitality, gifts or gives as a reward, as a gift, these two horns in exchange for the amazing hospitality that I was given. So a translation for DR12b is I, the famed guest, i.e. the one who has received lofty hospitality from Holt or Holstein, gifted these two horns. So you can see that it's a little bit different from the typical translation that you run into, and hopefully a lot of the stuff I was saying here makes sense. And yeah, if you have any questions, of course, let me know. So in the next video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about DR12A. And I believe this is going to help provide a better holistic interpretation. So again, this video is focused on mostly the words and how the words can help us to understand the overall context. But for example, when I was in Copenhagen, I was going to the museum and looking at all these different horns. And granted, they are much later, but you'll actually see that there are horns from like the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries with inscriptions around the rim. And it would say things like, help Maria, talking about the Virgin Mary, right? And so it was sort of like, this tradition, if you will, of carving runes around the rim and drinking from it to get some sort of like apotropaic effect, might be quite old. So stay tuned for the second one. I mean, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them down below. And go ahead and like the video, of course, and share the video with whomever might find this interesting. And that's pretty much all I had for you today, so go ahead and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Also, I created recently this Instagram, in which case I'm going to jump on every now and then and give you guys like an old Saxon word of the day. I do give you the full pronunciation and the translation, and so I'll go ahead and put a link to that Instagram down in the video description if you want to go ahead and follow me there. That is all I have for you all today, and I will see you next week with an even further in-depth analysis of these two horns.